Thank you, Emily, Jace, and Dedeker for being here on my YouTube channel. This is my first multi-person remote interview. So thanks
Wow.
for going on this ride with me.
First time for everything. So honored to be there on this part of the journey with you.
Absolutely.
I'm like a podcaster and like a solo YouTuber. And so it feels very much like combining both of those worlds.
Beautiful.
I've been a longtime listener of the Multiamory podcast and, got an early copy of the book. And I'm just like a big fan of that. Have been recommending it left and right. So I can't wait to dive into this with y'all today. But to start, if folks are like looking for relationship advice on YouTube, but somehow have managed to not come across y'all, how would you introduce each of yourselves, like individually and then like collectively the work that you do together?
Yeah, well, I can dive into at least introducing the work that we do together, which is that we created the Multiamory podcast in 2014, and Multiamory is a research-backed relationship advice show that centers non-traditional relationships, but does not center them exclusively. We also talk about a full range, everything from conscious monogamy to relationship anarchy as well. And so, the three of us have been podcast hosts. I've been working as a relationship coach as well for several years, working with individuals and couples and the occasional triad as well. And then for the past 200 years, we've been working on this book and we're so excited to finally be able to share it.
Yeah, I am a actor in addition to professional podcaster and now author, which is a really amazing thing to get to add to the resume for sure. But yeah, I mean, it's amazing when podcasting sort of becomes the main focus in your life in a lot of ways. And I'm just so very lucky that I get to do it with two of my favorite people in the world.
And I think Emily's selling herself a little bit short too, that she's also become the one who edits our podcast.
That's true.
Well. So
that's a very new development, but it's been very fun to learn.
A very powerful position. She can make us sound like jerks or not. So.
Ooh, yes, no, of course. I only try to make us sound better and more intelligent.
Right. And I'm Jace. I'm also one of the hosts and also involved in a lot of our technical things. But my day job is actually working in corporate America for a software company. So I'm kind of like our double agent into that sort of mainstream world of corporate 9-to-5 type jobs.
Keeping a pulse on the normies.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, so I kind of get the sense that y'all started your podcast for the same reason that I started my YouTube channel, which was just sort of like the relationship advice that was out there, like wasn't sort of like speaking to what I needed and was experiencing and wisdom that I was learning. And so can you share sort of like what was your origin story of the Multiamory podcast?
Yeah, the two of us, Jace and I, actually were in a monogamous relationship to start off, and we ended up opening up about 2 years into our relationship, and we decided, hey, things are working, but some things aren't, and we're interested in dating other people as well. And so we sort of started exploring non-monogamy from there, reading all the books, but there weren't actually that many references out there in 2014. It was like The Ethical Slut, it was Sex at Dawn, and Polyamory Weekly was the basically one podcast out there, but that was about it. And so we actually met Dedeker about a year into our polyamorous journey. Dedeker was already dating and being polyamorous for a couple years before that. And so, yeah, we started what was actually a quad initially. And because Dedeker was dating someone at the time as well, so the four of us came together. That didn't work out because a lot of quads are notoriously unstable. But then Jace, Dedeker, and I were a triad for a while. And during that time, Jace was like, let's create a podcast. I want to do that. I've always wanted to do that. And for whatever reason, Dedeker and I said, sure. And so that's how it was born. And yes, to your point, exactly what you were saying, there just weren't that many resources out there, especially resources that specifically spoke to us. It was more a lot of swinger resources or resources for people who were doing polyamory more in sort of a communal way, but not necessarily dyadic relationships like we had, and then triads like we were having at the time as well.
And then, from there, I mean, the podcast, it obviously wasn't an overnight success or anything like that. I mean, none of these ventures often are. But I don't know. It was the weird thing that, like, within the first year of starting the podcast, like, there was a lot of relationship turmoil. We started with this quad, and then, like, I broke up with my live-in partner. Emily and Jace ended up breaking up. Like, our relationship together changed a lot. Emily ended up getting into a monogamous relationship that she's still in to this day. And for some reason, we still kept doing the podcast, even though I think it would have been really, really easy at any point to just bail out, right? To not want to deal with the drama or the awkwardness or the communication or things like that. But like, we managed to push through it. And then the irony now on the other side is that, like, I think our relationship between the three of us is like way closer, healthier, more loving, more affectionate than it ever was, even going all the way back to before the podcast began. So it's just been this really amazing journey, producing together, running this small business together, and then co-authoring together as well. Like, it's been a decade of such an interesting exploration of all the different ways that important relationships can take.
Yeah, I one of the things that I love about like polyamory, both like my own personal practice of that and a lot of like the resources that I found, is I feel like when you do polyamory well, it's like the same sort of tools for doing monogamy well as well. It just sort of like there's a higher expectation that polyamorous folks will actually like figure out that work because it's so stigmatized, or we've been told that it's hard. Whereas monogamy, you can just kind of coast for a while. And so I often get folks from questions that are like, oh, I'm like gay, but I'm not polyamorous. Like, can I still work with you? Or I'm like polyamorous, but I'm not queer. Can I still work with you? And I'm like, yes, please. So I definitely want to, dive into sort of like the open and the poly specific resources in the book and from your podcast. But I also like want to sort of like set the stage for folks that like might not be open or polyamorous. Like, what is the sort of like the transcendent wisdom that you see?
Thank you.
What a way to
like
put it.
Yeah, I know it's a big phrase. That's a high bar that I just set for y'all. But like, that sort of like transcends relationship structure that is sort of like at the heart of your book. Because even in your book, you talk about like this also can apply for like coworkers or parents. It's not even just only for romantic relationships. And so like, what is sort of like the core like principles that y'all have like divined over the past almost 10 years?
Yeah, I think the place to start there is right. We started the podcast initially to just be about polyamory. And then, as our own lives changed, and also as we started getting more listeners who were not in polyamorous relationships, or maybe they were and decided it wasn't for them, or just kind of seeing this broader range. And then that, along with the question we would get early on a lot was, are there enough topics to keep this podcast going if it's just about polyamory? And our answer was always, well, yeah, I mean, it's about relationships, and we've had relationship help books and, TV shows and radio shows and podcasts for, decades. So clearly there's
like
a need for this.
Yeah.
Right. Clearly there's not a lack of, things to talk about and things that people are struggling with or whatever. So that then in the show transitioned to more consciously approaching the show as this is something where we're talking about the principles of good relationships and healthy relationships, which a lot of times for us comes down to good communication. And that, kind of looking at that and saying, okay, there's some stuff kind of like you mentioned that in non-monogamy or polyamory, you can't take for granted and you can't quite make as many assumptions going in. And so you're kind of forced to really talk about things and be clearer about your expectations or your concerns or things like that. And then likewise, I think in monogamy, there's a lot of research out there about monogamous relationships, a lot more than there is about polyamorous ones. And there's also just a lot of kind of conventional wisdom. And so for us, one of the big things has been looking at what's the research and what's some of this conventional wisdom, and let's see if there is any research to back it up. Mm-hmm. And then let's take that and make it so it can be applied for anyone instead of this only being focused on, marriage or something like that. And so kind of looking at that, and yeah, basically the big overall thing that's come out of it for us, I'd say sort of the key pieces we talk about in the first chapter of the book is that relationship success is not the same as lasting a long time. Right? You could have a 50-year shitty, unfulfilling relationship, or you could have a 1-week relationship that you felt like you grew so much and still maintain a friendship, or any number of things, right? And I would say that shorter one was the successful one, even though traditionally that's not how we would look at it. So I'd say that's one. And then the other is just being clear in communication and not relying on the assumption that they understand all of the subtext to everything you're saying, or your size or gestures or things like that. Because, even if we come from similar cultures to our partners, which is not always the case, but even then, our family may have dealt differently with those things. Our friend group may say those things. That word might have a totally different connotation to one person than the other. Or to one person, monogamy might mean you never even hang out alone with someone of the gender that you're attracted to. And for someone else, it might be like, oh yeah, I'm totally monogamous. I mean, we have sex on the weekends and when I'm on trips and stuff, and you do too. That's cool. But we're monogamous, right? There's a huge range of what fits in there. And if people don't talk about it, you can see how that sets you up for a lot of pain and suffering.
And those are like actual examples. I've worked with people who have said both of those things. And okay.
Right. Yeah. There's this interesting theme that's been coming up actually in a number of our interviews about how it is important for us to be expansive when we're thinking about, I think maybe even the term non-traditional relationships, because the fact that, I think so many people of our generation are monogamous, but we have a threesome on occasion, or I'm totally okay if you want to go have some platonic cuddling with your friend, right? And ultimately, especially when we're thinking about securing rights and protections and freedoms, we all want the same thing, which is we want that sexual choice, reproductive choice, relationship choice, right? It's not just, this weird little subset of non-monogamous weirdos in the corner. It's a lot more of us than maybe is obvious just at the surface level glance.
Yeah. I'm wondering, what are some ways that y'all define success in a relationship? Both for yourself or as you're working with community members or listeners or clients to help them sort of define success?
Oh, wow. What a question.
Yeah. I mean, I see the relationship that the three of us have as a huge success, even though we've broken up. And, I think a lot of people, when they ask well, who are your two podcast hosts? Immediately my mind goes to, well, they're my two ex-partners. And yet that's really not indicative of who they are to me as a whole. They are so much more than that. And I think that's a testament to the success that we've had after the romantic part of our relationship ended. And that's really huge, I think. If you can have a relationship with someone after you've broken up and it is healthy, it is mature, it is understanding of one another, it is respectful, that can equal success. And sometimes that looks like we had a child together and we're no longer married, but we have a great relationship after the fact. Or like Jace said, it can be, I met somebody on a trip in Spain and we spent a week together and that was it. And I never see them again. And that was a wonderful, transcendent moment in my life that really changed who I am. And so that's a successful relationship. I think, it means change for the better and understanding of one another and communication and love and kindness, I guess.
Yeah, maybe one way to think about it is that it's about a relationship that kind of broadens your experience of the world and how much you're able to, I guess, just experience your life and yourself and kind of growing as a person versus, and I bring that up specifically as a contrast to the way that I think a lot of people can end up feeling in relationships is kind of this, I'm boxed in by this. I'm now kind of stuck in this one role. I can't explore some of the things. And I'm not even talking about in other relationships or sex with other people necessarily, although that could be it too. But even just, now I'm kind of stuck in this particular role and in this particular way that we do our family. Whereas for another person in a monogamous relationship, it could feel like, wow, this relationship has really brought out so much new in me and has let me explore and grow and change over time. And then with all this, just the last thing to put on it is that this also applies to any kind of relationship, kind of like we mentioned before, that the same could be true of a close friendship or even a family member or something like that, that if this is one that feels like, wow, I really love having this person in my life and this is a really fulfilling relationship to me, that's amazing. And especially if you can be intentional and appreciate it for that, that's such a cool thing that a lot of us take for granted. Because like, yeah, they're my friends, but as soon as I'm dating someone, I'll kick them all to the curb so that I can focus on that person. I'm dating.
I don't think anyone consciously thinks that.
Right.
It's
But
just
it happens
that
a lot.
happens, and then our culture really encourages that behavior, right?
Yeah.
And says that it's okay.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, do I need to jump in with my sad story? I call it a sad story. This is actually a story that I tell in the book. Because it's so funny. Like when you ask that question, the first memory that came to mind was of a relationship that ended, so traditionally we might call that a failure or like not a successful relationship. But, basically what happened in this relationship, I was with this person for maybe a year, a little bit over a year, and we were dating non-monogamously. And he reconnected with his ex-partner and decided like he wanted to date his ex-partner again. And his ex-partner was not non-monogamous, was like really having a hard time. And kind of her terms were like, okay, I'm fine with you dating other people, but you can't sleep with anybody. Was kind of her terms. And he was like, okay, yeah, I can agree to those terms. Right. And so he pitched that to me and I was like, no, that's weird. Like I wasn't part of this agreement setting conversation. And if this is going to be the dynamic, like I don't want to be in this relationship. And for me, so we ended up breaking up, right? It was very sad for both of us. We still wanted to be together. And it was such a weird thing because that experience felt really shitty in the moment. Like I really had to grieve that relationship. I was really sad that I couldn't convince him, successfully on like why this was a bad idea to agree to it or why this wouldn't work out or yada, 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 all those things. Like I would have rather had gone many different ways. And yet for me, it was like this success of like, okay, I was really clear about like a boundary for myself. And it wasn't about trying to get him to do something different. It was just like, well, now I found myself in a relationship that I can't be in. And so I'm not going to be in the relationship. And then it also helps that like, later on, he and I were able to talk about it and reconnect and like still be on a good friendship level. We didn't get back into a romantic relationship or anything like that. But it's so funny because I look back on that as a relationship success, even though it had an ending that like neither of us really wanted. But I don't know, there was something completing about it. There was something about me being able to like successfully protect myself with the boundary, that when I look back on it feels more whole and complete and doesn't feel like it was this broken down failure. So it's maybe like a non-traditional take on it, but that's just what came up for me.
I love it. And folks should read the book for like more of that and more on boundaries. And something about that story reminded me that I think that when I first started dating non-monogamously and like getting more involved in like the non-monogamous and polyamory community, I sort of had this sense that like it was okay for relationships to end, right? Like they could still be successful, but like you have to sort of like be enlightened like polyamorous people and like transition your like de-escalate your relationship into sort of like a friendship. And then it could be a success. So it's like, well, we're still like best friends. We just like aren't partners anymore. And like I love sometimes that like doesn't happen, right? Like the relationship is shitty and it just needs to end, and you like didn't learn anything from it other than like what not to do, and you like kick them to the curb. Or sometimes like it wraps up and like you're not friends anymore, but like it can still be a success even if they don't have this sort of like lingering presence in your life. And so I appreciate that those sort of like perspectives that were like definitely in all three of your stories.
Yeah, no, it's funny because I just had an experience a couple of weeks ago. So years before, I had a relationship with someone for a few months, right? Not super long, but long enough that we were somewhat close. And it just kind of didn't work out. Like the attraction just wasn't quite there, and so we amicably went our separate ways. But it wasn't like we really stayed in touch. It's like, I guess we're still Facebook friends or something, but it's not like we message each other. Basically, fell out of touch for the most part.
Yeah.
But then years later, they happened to be in town in Seattle while I was moving. And we're like, hey, do you want to come hang out? I was like, actually, would you want to help me move a king size mattress and then we can go get dinner?
Wow. Put him to work.
It's an example of one that it's not like right. We didn't actively keep that relationship going in terms of that. People sometimes feel that pressure to really stay close with someone after they break up, and we didn't do that. But that also didn't mean it was like, oh, we can never talk again, or we can never be friendly and hang out. And so we still, maybe once every year or two, we'll chat a little bit and talk to each other. But it's not like we tried to make this, like you said, oh, they're my best friend now. We're just not together that way. It's like, it doesn't have to look that way all the time.
Yeah.
Well, I think I fell victim to that, right? Because literally this same person in this story that I told, I think maybe 2 or 3 months later, I was like, okay, I think I can reconnect to this person and be super enlightened and be their friend, and like it's going to be okay. And like, so I reached out to him to like set up a Zoom call or whatever. And I was feeling so enlightened. And then the minute that I saw his face on the Zoom call, I was so fucking angry instantly, that I was like, oh no, this is a bad choice. I shouldn't have done this. I was not ready for this. And it was a really awkward conversation, and I did need more time not talking to this person. And again, even today, it's not like we're best friends or anything like that. But I do think that I also fell into that narrative of like, we're the enlightened polyamorous people. And so we just like really smoothly slide in and out of different levels of escalation with people. And there's no obstacles to that or anything like that, which is not necessarily true.
Yeah. It's like I have all the feelings. I just have
exactly.
tools for dealing with those feelings. Like I still feel the full range of the feelings. And I feel like I learned a lot of those tools from y'all. What are some of your like favorite or go-to tools that you've like shared on the podcast and that folks can find in the book?
I've said this one a lot, but the very first tool that we lay out is the Triforce of communication, and it's fantastic and it's so easy. All you have to do, it's essentially a tool for if you come home or if you're in the middle of an intense conversation, and so often people will automatically turn to, well, let me help you like fix this thing. Let me problem solve with you and give you like a way that you can do something better or whatever. And often that's not what you want out of a conversation, especially if you're, with a loved one and you just want some love and support from them. So when you come home, for example, you can tell a person, okay, Triforce number 1, I just want to put something out there. I've been in a funk all day. I just want to like let you know this is why. I'm just going to tell you, and I don't need anything from you. Triforce number 2 is, I would love some support. I would love some cuddles. I would love some poor baby. It's going to be okay. That sounds really hard. I'm there for you. That's Triforce number 2. And you can let your partner know, this is what I need from you. Please don't give me anything else. And then Triforce number 3 is finally, yes, I really do want to problem solve with you. I really want to know, like, if you were in my shoes, what would you do differently, or how would you approach this situation? And then you can problem solve together. But it is like very clearly laying out with your partner, these are the things that I need. And if in the middle of, getting one thing, you decide, actually, never mind, I'm good, I just want love and support, then you can tell your partner that too. If you've listened to the Multiamory podcast, both of you, you can say like, I just want some Triforce number 1, or I just want some Triforce number 2, but you don't have to, the other person doesn't have to know the tool in order for you to be able to effectively use it with them.
Yeah,
right.
I feel like I listened to that episode. Oh, sorry. I feel like I've listened to that episode like multiple times, and so I'm glad that it's like now in written book format, so I can like bookmark it and flip back to it when we need it.
Exactly.
It's also kind of funny timing that I didn't realize our book would be coming out around the time of Tears of the Kingdom as well. So like the Triforce is in the zeitgeist right now. Yes. Everyone knows.
It was
Yeah,
named
I
after the
know.
Legend of Zelda's Triforce.
Mm-hmm.
I only know about that it's Zelda because of y'all.
Oh,
That's
okay.
fine. That's
Gotcha.
I'm a
fine.
nerd in a lot of ways, but not in that way.
Not
No
at
That's
all.
problem.
okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's okay.
Yeah, I was just going to add that, in Emily's example, it's like coming home to a partner, but this can apply anywhere, right? This can apply in your friendships and your family relationships. It's particularly helpful if you think about even like a parent-child relationship.
Yes, I was going to say that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? That being able to be clear, and again, they don't have to know the numbers that go with the Triforce, but they could just say, just like realizing that if someone doesn't know what you're looking for from some communication, they might give you the wrong thing, not because they're trying to give you the thing you don't want, but because they don't know. So again, going back to that, don't assume that people can read your mind about what you're looking for. And so being able to say, hey, this shitty thing happened, and maybe they start giving advice, to instead of the usual pattern, which is telling them all the reasons why their advice wouldn't work, because really that's just not what you want. They're getting frustrated you're not taking their advice. You're getting frustrated that they're not comforting you and you feel shittier now and everything sucks. To instead to kind of notice, right, this is that Triforce problem that I read about in that really cool book. Hey, actually, what I'm looking for is like, can you just, tell me that sucks and, encourage me. And I'm not looking for advice right now, maybe later, but really not right now. That's not what I'm looking for. Or on the opposite, this is the one that Dedeker does to me all the time. And she'll share about something and I'll be like, oh my gosh, yeah, that really sucks. Like, I'm sorry you're going through that. And she's like, no, I actually want some advice. Like, help me problem solve this.
Yeah, usually it's the opposite dynamic in our relationship. Is I'm like, no, really though,
That's
I need
impressive.
your brain. I need your brain on this. I need ideas.
Right.
I need brainstorming. Just give me something.
Yeah.
I love it. Because you're a chewer, right? So you've already if you're talking
Yes.
to him about it, you've already
Yes. Yeah. So we should talk about the whole chewers and
I
spewers
was gonna
thing.
say
That's a
that.
good segue.
Yeah.
This is a great segue. So talk to me about like chewers and spewers and as it relates to like interpersonal communication.
Yeah, so chewers and spewers is just kind of the cute name that we attached to the phenomenon of, some people having a processing style that's maybe more inherent or their default. So we can break it down into people who are internal processors, the chewers, versus the external processors, the spewers. So chewers, and I know this because I am one, and I chronically tend to be in relationships with spewers. Emily and Jace are both spewers.
Hi.
Yeah. So chewers tend to want to be a little bit more introspective. Maybe when they're having a bunch of different emotions or feelings or confusing thoughts or a bunch of different thoughts coming up, want some time on their own to just like sit, think through it, maybe even write through it. And kind of the whole point with a chewer is like they really want to think everything through before saying something or before deciding on something or before conveying something to the other person in the conversation, right? So it's kind of like, okay, I want to really get all my ducks in a row, really make sure I know what it is that I'm feeling, what it is that I'm thinking, and then I'm going to tell you, right? And then, the external processors, the spewers, it's, when they have all these thoughts come up or feelings come up, it's kind of like I need to work through them in real time, right? So I need to talk through them in real time. I need to bounce ideas off of somebody. I need to get it outside of myself in order to get clear on what it is that I actually think and feel. And neither of these processing styles are inherently better than the other, but when people are in relationship, it can land in very different ways, right? So like for myself as a chewer, when I'm with a spewer and they start spewing, I'm often filtering through, oh, this is like your final thought on this. This is how you feel about this. This is upsetting. Or, oh gosh, you said this kind of weird critical thing about me, like as you're trying to figure this out. And so I'm going to take everything with a bunch of weight and gravitas. And then on the spewer side, when they have a chewer partner, they can feel abandoned, or they can feel like this person's stonewalling me, or they're shutting down, or they don't have anything to say, or they're numb, or they don't have any feelings, right? So we came up with that framework mostly for the sake of generating awareness about it, right? That like, if you know that you're a chewer, you can be empowered to say something like, okay, I need 20 minutes to sit by myself, and then I'm going to come back and then we're going to talk it out, right? Or if you're a spewer, you can be like, okay, just hear me out. Just let me think out loud, right? You can just do little things to kind of preemptively repair or preemptively pad the way that you process
Yeah.
in order to help prevent some of the default cycles that we can fall into when we're not quite understanding the way that our partner's brain works.
Yeah, I'm definitely a spewer, and I have been in relationships with chewers, and it can be like really hard and like bring up a lot of like, if I can tell that they're like going through something but like not talking about it, it like my sort of anxious brain then goes to like, oh, what did I do wrong? Are you mad at me? Is it my fault? Then it's like, no, I'm having an anxiety attack. Like, calm down. Like, and so I have two questions. One is sort of like, do you have any advice for folks that are sort of like, when they how to take care of yourself when there's like a mismatch between your and your partner's processing styles? And then this is sort of like a more meta question that applies not just to this, but sort of all the advice that we're talking about. I know like one of your sort of like catchphrases is like, don't weaponize this shit, right? And so it's like, so great, we can talk about sort of like what to do if you're like at a sort of like mismatch, but also just in general, like how do you know when it's like, this is like some of my stuff to work on, or this is like some of our stuff to work on together versus like, you're the asshole, or like I'm the asshole, or like we're just for like fundamentally incompatible.
I also am dating a chewer and I'm a spewer, and this ended up being a really big challenge early on in our relationship, really for a number of years, just because if we were in conflict, I would be heightened, we both would be heightened, but he would be like, okay, I need to step out for 30 minutes, just literally close the door to my office and be away. And that made me feel really like he was stonewalling me or just leaving the conversation or abandoning me. And it really sucked. It hurt. It was challenging. But I realized also that that time sort of allowed me to emotionally regulate to a degree as well. And so over time, it did become really nice to have those moments of like, okay, yes, we're halting, which is another thing that we talk about at the end of the book, which stands for hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. Basically, if you're emotionally heightened or if you are any of those things, take care of that first, stop the conversation, take care of that, and then maybe come back to the conversation later. But we always talk about also, if you are leaving a conversation for a period of time, if you're halting, to make sure that you say to each other, okay, in 30 minutes or in an hour or in 24 hours, we are going to come back to this conversation and we are going to continue it, so that at least there is this amount of time that you know we are going to come back and we're not just going to completely get rid of it or say like, well, hopefully they'll just forget about it or whatever. And then you don't come back to the conversation. I think it is really important to come back. So for me, over time, I've really appreciated that moment to rest and to stop and to take a breath. And even though sometimes I want to continue, I want to honor and respect my partner, and they are honoring and respecting my need to come back to the conversation as well.
Yeah.
I appreciate you bringing up the weaponizing part of it, because I think this can be a great example that you can hear about spears and chewers on the podcast or read about it in our book, and then that can be weaponized into, well, I'm a chewer, so it's okay for me to go slam the door into my office and not talk to you for a week because I'm chewing, right? Or it can be, well, I'm a spewer, so it's okay for me to just like verbally vomit onto you and not let you escape the conversation and just like throw whatever thought or feeling is in my head at you, right? And really, it's not the point of this, right? You know, the point is that with more clarity, more awareness, and more information, this is a starting point for collaboration with you and the other person, right? So you can be like, okay, I think I've identified I'm probably a chewer. And I think I've identified that like you can feel abandoned when I need time or when I go quiet, right? Like, what are some things that we can do? What are some things that we both can do to make this feel a little bit easier the next time we get into an argument, right? And in our book, we give a ton of like concrete examples of ways that chewers can adjust their behavior, spewers can adjust their behavior without needing to adjust who they are fundamentally, in order to make it so that we can still get to communication and connection and safe attachment at the end of the day, right? So like Emily's example is a good example of that, right? Of like, okay, I know my partner's going to chew, but we're going to agree specifically on when are we coming back to this so that no one has to feel abandoned, right? So again, with so many of these, the hope is that it's not something where you can find a label and then use it to stay fixed in a toxic pattern. It's like you can use it as the step up into something that feels better for both of you.
I think this is particularly important for, on the other side too, with the chewers, to realize that if their partner or their friend or whoever is a spewer, to kind of, by having that label, hopefully it helps them to realize, okay, I'm not going to take everything that comes out of their mouth while they're processing as seriously as
gospel.
Right, as something that I say might be, right? Because they're just working it through. They might say something and then later in the same conversation say the opposite thing because they're trying it on, because they're working it out. And I think that's something that, kind of like how Emily said, that as a spewer, when her chewer partner would want to walk away and be, in his room by himself, that felt hurtful until she understood, oh, that's part of his processing. On the other side, it's that, oh my gosh, you said all these horrible, hurtful things or just wrong things or whatever while you were working this through.
Yeah,
right.
chaotic
For
things.
sure.
It's not like a
Usually
cover
chaotic.
for someone verbally abusing you necessarily.
No, but
Right. I should clarify that. Yes. I'm not saying that you're throwing, epithets at them or something like that, but just that you're working through it, trying to figure out how you feel about something, exploring options for them to realize, okay, because they're saying these out loud doesn't mean they've done what I do, which is I've thought about it and I've come to you with my conclusion. They're still in that early process. So I think from both sides, having the label, not just for yourself, but for the other person, can help to just remind you, right, you're doing that thing. I need to not take this so personally in this case.
Yeah, my other partner, who's also a spewer, because of course, why wouldn't he be? When we talked about this, he started dropping in the caveat of like, okay, this is a first draft thought. Just a first draft thought. Or
that's
even
nice,
those little
yeah.
caveats of, okay, I'm going to say this. I'm not entirely sure if that's right, but I need to say it out loud. And then I'm going to check if that's right. And then maybe I'm going to adjust it, And so again, even those little things can really help. And then also, to be fair, I've also dated a chewer and it drove me nuts. So,
gosh.
Yeah.
just both ways.
Yeah, I love that line that he started adding. Like, this is a first draft, and I think you call them like microscripts. Something that I say a lot is like, the story that I'm telling myself is like this happened.
That's a good one.
And I'm wondering, like, what are some I guess, like, what are microscripts for folks, and like, and sort of like, how can folks use them?
Sure. Yeah. So microscripts is yet another chapter in the book. And basically the gist of it is for things like that, where if you have something that repeatedly has come up that's been challenging, like if you imagine the long version, the non-microscript version of what Dedeker was just talking about, is her partner would say, okay, I want to talk through something. I haven't totally worked it out yet, but I'm just going to process it, and I want you to listen and help me work through this, and don't take anything I say too seriously. And it's a lot to explain and to remember to do, right? So the idea is that together you kind of come up with, this is a few words, or sometimes it can even have a little gesture, or maybe involves a little song, or whatever it is. Something silly is
I love the little
better,
dance
right?
you're doing.
That's very common for Jace to go song and dance based with his microscripts.
Yeah.
For sure. But the idea is that then instead he can say, this is a first draft thought, boom. And that, because that's been established between them, he can say that little thing. And one, it's easier for him to remember, okay, yeah, this is what I'm doing. And also for her to go, first draft, sure, yeah, got it. I can put myself in the mode to listen to you that way, instead of I'm listening to you tell me something that you've decided already. And so that's basically a microscript in a nutshell. You can use it in a lot of other situations, like to diffuse a fight that's getting tense, or to, remind yourselves about something, or just to feel appreciated by each other. Like one we talk about in the book is saying, ready? If someone asks you, like your partner asks you to do a chore or something, like, oh, could you, take care of taking the trash out while I do the dishes or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we can react with that, like, okay, because you don't want to. No one wants to take out the trash. Like, that's not fun. But because you side like that, your partner now feels shitty of like, well, okay, I'm also doing stuff. Like, you don't have to be a jerk about it. And you're like, no, I was going to do it. I wasn't trying to be a jerk. And you kind of end up in this situation where everyone feels bad, even though no one meant for that to happen, right? And so one of the microscripts is just to say, ready, and maybe strike a little superhero pose or something. And then we can even, like, once you establish that, then it's that, like, hey, can you take care of this thing? And if the person does kind of sigh, the other one could be like, you mean? And they're like, right, ready, like, do the pose. You can be goofy about it, you can be silly, but just the point is that it gives you this little shorthand to remember, oh yeah, we agreed this is how we want to behave here, this is how we want this to go. So a microscript is like a little easy prompt to get you there.
One of the things that I love about the book is that it's like super actionable. It feels like very practical. But it also feels like, as a longtime listener of the podcast, I'm like, oh, this is like tens, like hundreds of hours of like wisdom distilled into like a very readable book. And I like, it's a different format, right? To like write one book than to record 9 years worth of
a weekly podcast
episodes. And so can you talk about like the process of like translating all of these like big ideas that you developed over the years into like a written book that has a beginning and an end?
Yeah, and what a challenge, right? I mean, honestly, this whole book process started back in 2019, if you can believe it. It's been so long. And because there's a whole pandemic that happened in the in-between, it does feel like it's been 200 years that we've been working on this. So it's all started in 2019. We actually had a listener of ours who was a literary agent in New York who reached out to us because I think Jace had like teased on an episode just offhand that he was interested in writing a book. And so we super lucked out with having an agent that reached out to us who was already a fan of the show and was really curious to see what we could make of it as far as writing a book. This agent had already worked with my literary agents in the past, and so we're, both of them are representing our book because, of course, it's polyagentery because we can't do it any other way. And it's been fantastic to have them on the team. And so, our initial book proposal went through a lot of different drafts and a lot of different rounds. Like one version of it was like, okay, is it just going to be this big ultimate compendium guide to like everything we've ever talked about on the podcast? And like really quickly you find out that's impossible to do if we're still making content every single week that we can't create. We're never going to catch up with ourselves. And then, there was a version of like, okay, what if we, instead of really zooming out, what if we like really zoom into like just our radar tool, like just our relationship check-in tool, and we make maybe a smaller book just about that. But then ultimately what we landed on was looking at, okay, what are the tools that have really resonated the most with people? What are the episodes that have resonated with the most people? What are tools that our audience has picked up and improved upon or modified in their own ways, right? So we identified these 6 different tools, and we even went so far with some of them of almost running little like informal focus groups with some of our listeners and our Patreon supporters. So like, for instance, we would have like this little Zoom meeting with people literally just to talk about the radar tool, right? To just be like, what's been your experience with this tool? What's worked well? What hasn't worked well? How have you modified it? What are the ways that you would want to see it differently? How do you explain it to someone? How do you pitch it to a partner, right? So to have a sense that it's not just stuff that we came up with, but it's like these living things that people have picked up and run with and found ways to change so that it works even better for themselves, right? And so I think that's been one of the best parts about the fact that we're writing a book based on our show, is that it's not just us, it is our audience that comes along with us as well here, right? And that's why there's so many stories that we get to pull from real life of people using these tools and getting that feedback. So yeah, and then we wrote a book, and then it was super easy, and it was great, and here we are.
A lot of Google Docs, a lot of color coding, and figuring out, breaking down every single chapter really specifically, and saying, okay, you're going to take this section, and this section of the chapter, and then, another person will take that section, and then we kind of all swap and look at each other's work. And so basically by the end of the whole process, all of us have touched every single page multiple times. I say it's not for the faint of heart to write one book with 3 people, but thankfully the 3 of us know each other's voice so well, and we can kind of blend all of that together into one cohesive voice to a degree. So I hope we were able to accomplish that.
Yeah, that was something that our editor at the publisher mentioned to us. She said, this is the first time I've had more than 2 authors on a book where there's been 3. She's like, yeah, usually 1, sometimes there's 2, but 3. She's like, I was a little nervous about it, but what I get from you guys, like, it still reads like one voice. And I think that's really would have been much harder to do if we hadn't been planning episodes and, writing copy for our website, or, writing up our documents every single week for our show for, I guess probably when we started it 7 or 8 years up to, 9 years now. If we hadn't been doing that so long, I think that would have been harder. So that's another thing, that just the fact that we have that experience and that we've got some systems in place already, like our color coding is something we do on every single episode to help us keep track of who's doing what. And so being able to bring that into the book was really helpful.
Yeah, I know it's in the title, but it really does feel like the essentials, like for any for modern relationships, for any modern relationship. You guys, y'all nailed it. So like when I'm thinking about like who should read this book, who I recommend it to, what I want to say is like literally everyone should read it. But I know that like that's like a big, broad, sweeping statement, and so I'm wondering if you like figured out like what are some signs that like if a person is going through this or thinking this or experiencing this, like what are some indicators that this book might be right for them?
So, I mean, speaking of broad sweeping statements, I've boiled it down to just like 2 indicators, honestly. I'm sure there's probably more. The first one is that we have to clarify that this is not a how-to manual for non-monogamy, and it's not written just for non-monogamous people. Yeah. We've tried to include examples that include not just different forms of non-monogamy, but also monogamy as well. But you do need to be comfortable with non-monogamy existing. I think that's one big thing right at the gate. You have to be okay with the fact that some people are non-monogamous. You yourself don't have to be, but you have to be okay with that, or else you're really not going to jive with this book. And I think the second one comes down to, do you feel empowered to change the way that you communicate and thereby change the way that communication happens in your relationships? I think that's the really important part here, right? Because we're not putting out any kind of magical formula. We're not putting out any kind of 10-step program that's going to transform your relationship in 10 days. Like, it really is like, you have to be the one to read a tool and be like, I can try that. Emphasis on try, right? It doesn't even have to be, I can do it 100% successfully first time out the gate. It doesn't have to be, I can do this to a T exactly as it's laid out in the book. It's just like, I can try this thing on, or I can ask my partner and myself to try this thing on together. And I really think that's the important part. Earlier in the conversation, we were talking about applying these things, not just to romantic relationships, but to coworkers, family, parents, things like that. And I'm not going to go off on this whole story, but at the beginning of the pandemic, I decided to go to therapy with my mom, this could be a whole talk. It could be a whole book in and of itself, to be quite honest. And part of the reason that I did was that I identified, when I run into relationship conflict or communication breakdowns in any other relationship in my life, I feel empowered to be like, to point out the problem, to take responsibility for my part of it, to make some suggestions, to collaborate with the other person of like, hey, let's try this. Or what if we tried this? Or, hey, there's this tool I heard of, maybe we can try this. And I realize I do not feel that at all in my relationship with my mom. It feels like, no, the communication is just the way it is. She's just the way it is. I'm just the way I am. It's going to be stuck that way forever. And so for me, part of the decision to go to therapy was like, we need to feel empowered to communicate in a different way, right? So again, like I said, that's a whole other story for a whole other time, but I think it helped me zero in on like, I think that sense of self-efficacy, that sense of like, I can, or we can at least try something different, is key. Because just us on the other side of our microphones are not going to be able to do anything for someone who's listening. Right. Like, you have to have this sense of like, I can try some of these things.
Yeah. So maybe it's not, transform your relationship in 10 steps in 10 days. But like what, and of course, like you alone can't do anything, but like, what are some changes or transformations that you have seen, either like from listeners over the years or like from early readers of the book? Like, what journey do you expect people to go on, and what changes might they see in their relationships of all sorts?
Yeah, I think there's such a range of things that we've seen and things that people have told us about. Everything from, we just were at a podcast conference a couple months ago and had a person come up to us after our talk that we gave that was about making podcasts. It's kind of more of like a technical talk for podcasters. But he came up to us afterward and was like, I have to run real quick because I'm giving a talk down the hall. But I just wanted to say your podcast literally saved my life and saved my marriage. So like, thank you guys. Got to go. Bye. We're like, wow, you want to know more about that? It could be that extreme. Or on the other side, we've run into people who've said, oh my gosh, like we started using Radar and it really helped our relationship. And we now actually use it in our business that we own as well. And we structure all of our like business meetings in this same format to kind of bring a little more humanness and care into the way that we run our business. And then also to people who said, yeah, I listening to this podcast and joining your community helped me feel empowered to leave the relationship I was in, because I realized that it wasn't a good fit and that I was the only one trying to do anything to fix this relationship. And you helped me understand that while there's some things I can do just from my side, there's only so far that can go if your partner is not willing to work with you to make that relationship better. So I know that's not like the one clear answer that you were asking for, but it really covers a range.
Yeah.
No, that's really helpful. I also just like love that you like noting that like sometimes getting out of the relationship can be the success.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. I just wanted to jump in with the example of how we've seen the Triforce of Communication tool really help people. So, I mean, we've heard from people who report back to us about, yeah, it's like, it's clarified so much when I am able to come home to my partner and be really clear about what it is that I need from them in the moment, or heard from people taking it into the workplace, right? Like with my team that I manage or with my manager, I'm able to be very clear about when I'm actually wanting his problem solving and when I really don't want his problem solving in a particular issue. And what's been really fun to see is, so we have a private Facebook group and a private Discord server for our Patreon community. And I think without even necessarily our prompting, like our community members picked up the Triforce of Communication for interacting with each other online. So, which I think
I've noticed. Yeah.
It's,
yeah.
It's
cool.
so amazing to see. I think it really helps reduce the amount of drama and online fights and amount that like our moderator team has to step in for things, because the fact that people can be clear, when they're pouring their heart out, talking about, I'm going through this really painful situation. This is what my partner said to me, and this is what I'm feeling, and I don't know what to do. I only want T2. I just want sympathy, empathy, comfort, encouragement, whatever it is, right? That people can actually get what they want from their online community, instead of in that instance having a bunch of people rushing in to be like, well, what you should have done with this is, well, you need to tell your partner to fuck off, or like, well, this is the mistake that they made, And so I think that has helped a lot. And then of course, like our communities also picked it up and run with it and expanded it into like Triforce number 4 memes or like cute animal pictures or whatever it is, right? That I think just empowering a community where individuals can ask for what they want and then people can respond to that accordingly, that in itself, I think, has helped shape our community into a really supportive space.
Yeah, it's a large community, and it's very drama free, especially for a community of its size.
We're really lucky.
Yeah, really not to toot my own horn, but it's like I feel like yours and the queer theology community are the only ones that I've been in where it's like
exactly. Yeah, that's fantastic.
I trust myself in this community. It feels very supportive. I know that like, I don't know, fixing all of your life problems is like a good sales pitch, right? Or like find the people who are most in crisis, and like if you give me all of your money, I'll like totally fix your life. But what I have found is that like I've been non-monogamous for 13, 14 years. I've like consumed all this stuff. I'm a certified relationship coach, you know, like for the past many years now. And also, so I feel like I've got like a great relationship, a solid relationship. And also like your podcast, and then even like reading this book and revisiting that, like just sort of like makes it easier and like simpler, and it like takes away a lot of the friction. And I get this sense also from the community that like there are some people who are in crisis, and like sometimes I'm in crisis, right? But like it's not like a crisis book for when you're in crisis. It's like if you've got like a solid relationship and you just like want it to be like even better and even sweeter and even more fulfilling and even easier, like this will take you to that like next level. And it's like sometimes selling a book to someone who's like, yeah, like your life's already great, but it'll be even greater if you read this book. But I really feel like if you really got like if you feel like you've got like a solid relationship already, this will like really help you like take it to heights that you like didn't even realize are possible. And so like thank y'all for your work and for this book. I know it's gonna help some people, you know, like I said in the blurb, like I've already been recommending, and it's super helpful. Are there any like final thoughts on like what you would like people to sort of like take away, and or, you know, of course, like where to find y'all?
Yeah, I love so much what you said, because yes, I mean, we all do get into crisis in our relationships, but if you can take any of these tools and hopefully grasp for that in a challenging moment and know, okay, I have this touchstone, I have this like place to go to, that I can use this particular tool in this particular moment that's really challenging, or just to enhance my relationship every single day. If you have that and can use this book for that, then I think, you know, our hope is that it can be really helpful to so many people. But if you want to check it out for yourself, you can go to multiamory.com/book. You can buy it hopefully in bookstores wherever you would like to go, indie bookstores, Barnes and Noble, etc. And also just check our podcast out at Multiamory everywhere, and then Multiamory _podcast on Instagram.